All right, we're going to start, and I'll explain to you what I'm going to do in just a minute. But for Thursday's class, we probably won't start till closer to 3:30. So, Steve, you can get those. You can bring those extra long cigarettes in with you. Those extra long bacon cigarettes. And the reason that I'm telling you that is, you may or may not know, but in the beginning to mid-April, that's when the AITP National Conference is. It's in Atlanta. So far, at a minimum, Tony wants to go, Monica Cook wants to go, Chandra Copleen wants to go, Jessica Smith wants to go. All right. Well, they need an advisor, so I'd be going too. Now, two or three other people have signed up to go. Before Stephanie signs off on this, she said, I want to meet with you and all of the officers, and I want Shauna to be there also. Since Shauna's only there Tuesdays and Thursdays, and since Chandra can only meet at a certain time on Thursday, they settled on 3 o'clock. So that meeting will be somewhere between 5 minutes and 30 minutes long. If it runs past 25 minutes, I'm going to say, Tony and I have to get to class. Goodbye now. And I'm walking out at least. All right? But it may be only 10 or 15 minutes, but I don't know if Tony agrees with this, but every time I meet with Stephanie, I might plan on 10 minutes, but it usually takes more than like 2 or 3 times that amount of time. Okay? So, all right. So she's just very thorough in her job. That's all. She wants every I dotted, every T crossed, etc. And I give her credit for that. Okay. Now, am I right in assuming that now, and I don't know, Keegan, if you're still copying it or if you got it, but now does everybody have that folder? Okay. Okay. What I was thinking we would do, what we have done so far in here is in this book, the first week I went over all the sea junk. Okay? Then in the second week, again, we ended up losing a day for cold. We ended up losing a day for power. Okay, I'm still waiting for water, and then what else would be left? Heat, and I know, but no, I'm talking about for this class. So we'd only lose water from 3 o'clock till 5 o'clock, so they'd make everyone leave. There you go. Fire, boom, boom. But what we did in weeks 2 and 3, fragmented as it was we have gone over the material in chapters 13 through about, I believe it's 13 through 26. Okay, so that's like about 14 chapters. So I wanted to backtrack, and I wanted to look at the code that's in there. And I wanted to look at that code by having you take the code for the chapters and bring up the code. You understand what I'm saying? And run the code. Now, I'm not saying we're going to have a chance to bring up every program in chapters 13, 14, 15, 16, etc. through 26, but I'd like to bring up a bunch of them and have you start looking at them so you can start to get some familiarity, some comfort level with both A, Xcode, and B, Objective-C. All right? And I'm going to do this today, and we'll see how far we get. If we don't finish it, we'll finish it up on Thursday. Okay? Then the plan is I'm hoping that by the end of the class period Thursday, not in this class, but in the Android class, we've got our interface built, and we also have at least got a good jump on the code. So that next week in here, in this class, we'll build the interface in Objective-C. Does all that make sense? All right, just so you have an idea as far as what's going on. Okay, so again, I don't want to lecture out of the book here, but what I want to do is I want to look at the code that's in here. All right, so I'm going to concentrate solely on the code and on Xcode. Now, everybody is aware, right, when they talk about creating a project, the stuff that's in here, does everything that's on this screen make sense to you? I'm asking because I don't know. Do you know what all this stuff is? Okay? Since I'm not hearing anything, I'm going to assume that at least one of them is a no. So, this says that if you end up creating the app, that's what you're going to call it. Okay? That's what that means. That's the name of it. This is what I mentioned to you before. Eric told me that he only has his students put in there. You know, you could put anything in there. You can technically even leave that blank. All right. Notice he puts in Big Nerd Ranch because that's where he works. If you've never seen this, and you can go out and Google it, but it's actually this huge Butler building, this huge metal structure that I think is in Atlanta. All right. And they run classes and stuff out of there, and he goes all over the country. But that's the Big Nerd Ranch. And he is a cowboy, supposedly. You can tell because he's got a hat on, a cowboy hat on in the back. All right. The company identifier is a combination of what, typically it's there, it's like we could put Black Hawk here or whatever. But again, as we looked at in a similar way that we looked at it with the Android, it's typically reverse domain notation. So again, it would be edu.blackhawk.jscott or something like that for me. So set up the same way. This, all right, in this case, this means we're doing a command line. I mentioned this to you before, but I want to say it again. It bears repeating. And that is this, that when you get into Xcode, you may or may not have noticed, but near the top, you've got a thing that says, one of them says iOS, and then there's a bunch of options, and then down later it goes OS X, and there's a bunch of options. Do you understand what I'm talking about? You'll see probably a screenshot later, but do you know what I mean? So when you get into Xcode and you tell it to create a new project, then over on your left-hand side, there'll be iOS, and there's some options in here, and then OS X, and there's some options in here. All right? Historically, OS X has meant you're building things for the Mac, and iOS means that you're building things for iPhone, iPad, and to a limited extent, some of the iPod Touch stuff. Okay? The reason I'm telling you this is once we get into GUI stuff, we're going to be putting virtually everything. We're going to be building it in here. All right? But most of this book, other than chapters 30 and 31, builds in here because one of the options here is command line tool. Literally, when you choose that, it's as though you're writing something in C. You can use Objective-C, but it's as though you're writing something in C. And we looked at this in a chapter the other day. That's why one of the files it creates is something .man. It thinks you're creating a Unix or Linux command when you're doing that. The reason that I'm telling you that is when you choose the command line tool, you get Foundation. All right? And that is the big library that you use to work on stuff in OS X. On the other hand, when you work on things in iOS, you get what's called Cocoa, Touch. All right? And Foundation is really part of Cocoa. And as it has gone on over time, it's been extended. The Cocoa Touch stuff is where Cocoa gives you Foundation, Cocoa Touch gives you something that's called UI Kit. Okay? So why am I telling you all that? Because what I want you to understand is by choosing all this stuff, when you start to bring it up, you're automatically going to get that in your header file, which means that everything that's available in the Foundation framework is now available to your program. And I don't want to read to you. You can see what a Foundation framework is. In at least in some ways, it's part of an API. All right? It's part of an application program interface. All right? And as it says, the Foundation framework has stuff that's used both in iOS and OS X apps. All right? And they give an example of the NSDA class. And that's fine. All right. Now, we looked at this example the other day, but I want you to understand what's going on here. What you are, in essence, what you're doing right here is you're saying, hey, instantiate a brand new date object. And I want to be able to refer to that by using the word now. All right, so we're creating a pointer to a date object. And by default, unless you tell it otherwise, it should return the date along with the time for you. Okay? That's it. That's a pretty simple example. Now, as we'll see, and we already saw, there's another way of doing this, and we'll get to that in just a bit. All right, so we'll get to that in just a bit. Oh, thank you. Now, we looked at this before, and just a couple things from this. So what is this going to do? Well, we already talked about the first line. NSLog is our equivalent of printf. And it's going to say this NSDate object lives at %p. So right now, all that's going to do is that's literally going to print out an address. So that's the address in memory of once you created that date object where it lives. All right? Hopefully that makes sense to you. All right? And as it says, after you run it and build it and run it, and I'd like you to do this. So I'd like you to go and find, in Xcode, open up from chapter 13, because it's one thing to talk about this, it's another thing to start running this stuff. And I realize that we're behind the curve, so to speak, but I want us to start looking at this anyway. So in chapter 13, it's the time after time. All right? So when you open it up, it should look like this is what you end up building. Okay? Yes, you'll open the main.m. I believe it's that one. We'll find out right now. What's in this one? I don't, as far as yeah, you definitely don't want that one. All right. Now, this has got everything that they put in the entire chapter in here. Okay, just so you know. Everybody hear that? You shouldn't have to create a new project. You should be able to just bring that file up or bring the program up. And, oh, thank you, Bob. If you look up here when you are opening this stuff, yeah, maybe this is what you're asking. What you want to do is you should have a thing in there that says .xcode proj. If you double click on that one, it'll bring the project right up. Thank you. Again, I like that. You keep me honest, so I appreciate that. Well, somewhat honest. How's that? But what I wanted you to get to is a couple things. First of all, if you look up on the screen here and you look at this line that's now in gray, that's not an Objective-C line. That's a C line. Everybody see that? Int argc const char star argv. That is C. Right now, again, remember when you're creating Objective-C, anything that you do, you can write straight C in an Objective-C program. Not a problem. Double click on the .xcode proj file. All right, can you just take a second and look up here? What I want to make sure, this has got more than what we just looked at. But if you take a look up here, you'll notice that purposely, at least in a few places, the author introduces errors in here. So you can take some of the lines that are in here if you want to and uncomment them to see the kind of errors that you'll get. Such as, all right, well, there is nothing called foo interval. So you're calling a non-existent method. Does that make sense? All right. Here, notice it's supposed to be time interval since, and the S is not capitalized. See that right here? He did this purposely. So I put those in there, thinking that if you ever wanted to run these, uncomment something, so you'd get the error message, so you can start taking a look at the errors that will come up, because these are errors that everyone makes. All right? But the point is, this is the program basically right here. And if you understand this, then I'm cool with what we've done. So we're creating a date object right here. Here we're saying where it lives. All right? Here we're saying what the actual date is. So what we end up printing out there is both the date and the time. Then we want to figure out, all right, from that variable that we just created, how many milliseconds have elapsed since the Unix epoch date of January 1st, 1970. So if you run this, all right, these two lines that are here, they're going to change in that probably if you run it and then you run it in a couple seconds, the seconds on the time will change, but nothing else will. On here, since we're working with milliseconds, if you run it again, you're going to notice quite a difference in time. The point behind this is, what this is showing you is A, how to instantiate a new object, or a way of instantiating it, all right, and B, how to take an existing object and call an instance method with it. That's what this example is about. All right, and as they mention in the book, all right, the first one should give you something like this. The NSDate object lives at, and then it'll say after you run it, you put all that in there, then it'll tell you what the actual time is, etc. So it'll say something like this. Again, of course, your dates and times will be different, but you get the idea. All right. We've talked about this already, but again, it's important enough to bring up one more time. You have to understand the difference between these two things. And it all deals with who's doing the calling. If what you have in here is the name of a class, all right, then you are calling a class method. If what you have in there is the name of an object, then you're calling an instance method. Does that make sense? You'll find out if you uncomment at least one of those in there. I think in one of them we were calling a class method from an instance object or vice versa. Again, he purposely introduces errors in here to show you the kind of thing that everybody does now and then. Okay. Then he comes in with these bad messages. That's what I mentioned to you. We have no foo and whatever, all the other stuff that's in there. That's no biggie one way or the other. Now, at the end of this chapter, this was the challenge. Okay? This is the other file that's in the Chapter 13 folder. So let me bring it up here, and then we'll take a look at what that all says. It's not real much. Okay? What it's doing is it's coming in here, and it's creating a brand new NS host object, okay, which it is, and it's basically instantiating it here, and it's calling it host. Then on that host object, it's running the localized name routine, and it's saving it as name. Then it's printing out the name. When I ran mine, it comes off and it says the name of my computer is Jeff's Mac. So it's whatever it considers to be the internal name of the computer, which might be, it's not going to be Black Hawk Tech. I don't even know if these are set. But do you understand what's happening? Again, the key thing is to realize is we're using this as a class. So we are calling a class method. And we are assigning the results to a variable. Then we are taking that local variable that we just created and we're calling an instance method. We're setting that equal to another local variable. Then we're printing out the results of that second local variable. And hopefully you're starting to notice that other than when we are creating the object, almost always, other than when we're creating it, we don't use the asterisk. All right? So again, if you want a better explanation than the one I just gave you, it's right here. That's the challenge. It says, write a command line tool that prints out the name of your computer. And that's exactly what this program did. Okay. All right, and then they go on and on with this stuff. But again, hopefully you're starting to realize a pattern. So what are we doing? We're creating the object. We're printing out where it lives. We're printing out the results. That's nothing new. The number of seconds, that's nothing new. Then what are we doing? We're taking our current object and we're adding what? We're adding, is it 100,000 milliseconds to it? All right. Or 100,000 seconds, I guess. And it says in 100,000 seconds it will be. So we're doing math. The key here is this is a built-in, all right, that right there is a built-in, and I got to include, sorry, that including the colon, that is a built-in instance method. When you call date by adding time interval, it expects that what you're going to pass to it is an amount of time. As you'd probably guess, if we'd make that negative 100,000, we'd be going back in time. You can do that too. But again, what I'm trying to get ingrained in your minds is the way that this stuff is done, that we're coming in and we're creating an object. Then we're able to call methods based on that object. Okay? And that's the key thing to realize, because that's what, more than anything else, that's what's being done in virtually all of this stuff. So then they come in here and they create another object. All right, a calendar object. And then they print out the results of it. Okay? Now, this is the kind of thing that you have to be able to look at, and it's on page 97, it looks like, in figure 14.2. That has to make sense to you. I'm not saying doesn't make sense to you. I'm saying that has to make sense to you. So you have to realize that what you're doing right here is you've got cal, which is a local variable, so it's an instance variable, and that instance variable can call this routine that literally is called ordinality of unit, colon, in unit, colon, for date, colon. That's literally how you refer to it. All right, it's not called ordinality of unit. It's all of these. All right. So what does that mean? Well, that means that this expects that argument, this expects that argument, and then finally this expects that argument. So in other words, when you call this, it's expecting multiple arguments. All right. And part of the key to starting to get to understand this stuff is to always either use the help that's available to you through Xcode, or bring up developer.apple.com, and whenever you have a question, look through the documentation that's in there. If there's a problem with this stuff, it's not so much that it's different than Android or it's whatever. It's that there's so many ways of doing the same thing. And you'll notice when you start looking through there's a, what is he saying? There is a plethora of methods available typically to do the same thing. All right, so which one do you use? Yeah, yes. Whichever one you want, because there's a lot of them. All right. But this book, other than those 2 chapters, it teaches you nothing about design. There's nothing GUI in this book except chapters 30 and 31 or 31 and 32, whatever they are. All right. So this book was just designed to show you Objective-C. All right. We saw this. Now, when you start going through this stuff, what you start to learn is that, as it says, you can nest things. So notice here we've got it as 3 lines. Here we've got it as only 2 lines. And it works the same way when we talked about parens. What do I mean? This means I want to instantiate a date object right here, and I want to refer to it as seconds. And once you've done that instantiation, then called the time interval since 1970. So it works from the inside out in the same way that we talked about when we were working with parens. All right, so the ideas are similar. And again, this is a way in this language of chaining. All right? And it's interesting in the jQuery class because some of my students, I've been showing them this way of doing things. And some of them have already figured out, some of them are doing chaining that I'm very impressed because we haven't even talked about it yet. And they're chaining 3, 4, 5 levels deep to see what they can do. All right, and other people are like, I don't have a clue as to what you're talking about. So that's why we're not all at that point right now. All right. All right, then we got into this. So in other words, these two lines, the one that's crossed out and the one that's not, are doing the same thing. This second way that we see in there, that basically, that's a generic way of instantiating virtually any kind of object. So you put the class, alloc, inside of the first set of brackets, then on the outside, you put init. Again, you work from the inside on out. So what you're doing is you are allocating and initializing a date object. All right, that's going to be referred to basically from then on as now. We talked about nil. Again, nil, as it says, nil and null are very similar. By convention, we use nil when we refer to the value of an empty pointer. The good news is, if you've ever done that with C, when you try to print out something that's null a lot of times in C, you can make a program crash. Or you can get really bizarre results, or it might appear to work and then later it might blow up. But if you try doing something with nil and it just skips it, says, oh, there's nothing there, I'll just skip it. And it was purposely designed like that by the makers of the software. All right, so they give you an example here. So we just created a brand new object called Fido that we're setting equal to nil. And now we're trying to tell that Fido to go get the newspaper. Well, there is no method. There is nothing. But it won't fail. The program won't fail. Just nothing will happen. It will be skipped. Why? Because when we had done this, we had set it equal to null. Now, if you do that, and you would have done the allocation like we looked at before with the alloc and init, you'd probably get an error message right here. Okay. All right. As it says, in most object-oriented languages, setting a message to nil is not allowed. As a result, you have to do a lot of this. But you don't have to do that here. You can, but many books will tell you that doing that is extraneous. Because if it is equal to nil, it's not going to call it. And if it's not equal to nil, you want it to call it. So it's it's superfluous to put that in. You can put it in, but there's no advantage to putting it in. All right? All right. When you think of this, just so you know, for lack of better words, it's a wild card. If I declare a variable of being type ID, what I'm saying is it can hold anything. I'll let you know when the program's running the type of variable it holds. So as an example, if I was writing a program that might ask a user for different types of information, or based on what they give me for information, I might set the value equal to different things. Okay? What do I mean? Well, what if I say, how old are you? And I say, Stefan, how old are you? And he says 26. There's a difference between him typing in 26, where I handle it as a number, and him typing in TWENTY space SIX, where I handle it as a string. If what I'm working with in ID, I can figure out at runtime, I can let the system figure out whether or not it's a string or it's an int. You can't do that in most languages, because most of those languages, when you are resolving that stuff, it's being resolved at compile time. Here it's being resolved at runtime. All right. Now there's where there's a parallel to some of the stuff, some of the alloc and some of the stuff that you do in C. All right. And I do think there are some parallels, but I don't know how you can do exactly that. I know there's void pointers, and I know there's a lot of stuff that you can do, but this is different than what you see in at least most programming languages. All right. So this program right here, again, you can run this one. This is the one at the end of chapter 14. And why? Kind of an interesting program in that, as it says, what it does is it tells you how many seconds you've been alive. Of course, you might find that to be a very disturbing thought too. I don't know. All right. But it's seconds alive. So what do we have to do in here? Well, we have to set everything up. Now, I don't want to show you that because that's got my birth date in there. I shouldn't have shown you that. All right. All right. I'll show it to you anyway. Yeah, I already told you it was 56. But no, most people here do not know the date of my birth. All right. And it's funny because when it was the 21st, Tammy came up and she looked at me. She said, and I said, don't even say it. She said, okay. That was my birthday gift. Usually my wife, she said, what do you want for your birthday? I said, leave me the hell alone. All right. Actually, what I usually tell her for my birthday gift, you can't disagree with anything I say all day. That usually lasts about 5 minutes. All right. And my mom actually told me I was born at 9:45 in the morning. So that's all of it. So what it's going to do in here is it's basically I'm creating date components. All right. So I'm creating a date component object, then I'm filling up the components. As you can see, I'm setting the year, the month, the day, the hour, the minute, and the second. All right. Then I'm coming in here. Now notice what we're doing. We're creating a brand new calendar object. All right. And based on that, we're figuring out, and it's going to print out my birthday is, based on the information that I gave it. Then what we're doing is we're taking and we're figuring out in here, as it says, interval since, and we're passing a date of birth. So that's giving me a number. Literally, again, that's going to give me the number of seconds, okay, that since then. And when I take that and I divide it by the number of seconds that are in a year, it comes back and it tells me. This will tell me how many seconds I've been alive, and that tells me how many years I've been alive. So right now, December, January, it would say something like, it's not quite 57.25, so it'd be like 57.21 or something like that. Okay? So you can run it every day and find out how much older you're getting. But again, you start to see. And how did I know that was in there? Because they mentioned it in the book. So I started going through the documentation and digging through it. I'm not going to lie to you. Occasionally when I key stuff in, I'll find stuff in other books, and or something will be online. This stuff wasn't online. I did eventually find, after I finished and did the last one, all right, and couldn't get it to work right, then I found, there's a forum out there. But the forum that's out there is for version 1 of the book. The chapters don't coincide, and some of the programs are different. So I wrote these. So and I'm not saying, hey, I wrote these, I'm so proud. But if there's errors in there, it's because I put them in there. I wouldn't have put them in there on purpose, but if there are errors, it's because I put them in there. Oh, I missed the time zone? Yeah. Well, I was perusing through the channels last night, okay? I'm perusing through the channels. And I put on the USA, and they had wrestling on. And I noticed on there the guy was talking. I just listened to it for a couple minutes. And the guy said, welcome to our new friends in Australia who are on for the first time. And he said, but you're not Monday Night Raw there. You're Tuesday afternoon Raw. Because I don't know if it's on, I don't even know where they were broadcasting from, but it was about 8:30, 9 o'clock. But it was, so they got a big time zone difference there too. All right. Objects and memories on pointers and their values. Again, we've talked a little bit about this before, but again, your programs that you create in this book, and many of your programs are going to have something like that in there. I mentioned that before, that they are going to automatically keep track of all the references to objects that you have. It'll be done for you automatically. It's something that's called ARC, or automatic reference counting. Now, there's not a lot of code, I don't believe, in this chapter, so I just will go through it quickly, because most of the stuff that's in here we've already looked at. If you want to know more about ARC, you can go here. That's a beginning. There's a little bit about it in the book, but if you go onto the developer.apple.com site, there's a lot more. All right. String. String, as we talked about before, takes the place of char star in here. It has many of the same, Objective-C has many of the same methods that you have for string objects in C. And it has a lot more. All right? It has some stuff that's been specially created for this. A couple of key things, and we've talked about this before. Again, when you create a string, that's a string literal right there. String literals in this language, when you say something is of type NS string, you need the @ sign in front of it. Okay? Not a big thing, but it's something to remember, because if you don't put it in, you're going to get an error message. So they talk about some of the string methods in here, and a lot of these should make sense. Right? Things like length. So if we do this, we're imagining here, either we already did it or whatever, but data string length. Well, that, you know, if it's hello, HELLO, it doesn't count the \0 at the end. So it tells you how long that string is, type of an idea. All right. Notice we just got into this yesterday in the beginning Java class, where we talked about the .equals method, if you remember that with strings. That's how you do it here. What the people who created this language tried to do, you can agree with this or disagree with this, but you can find it in their very own documentation. They tried to come up with method names that reflected what you were trying to do. Is equal to string. So if you want to check to see if two strings are equal. And you already know this. This supposes that you're passing that in and that you're returning a Boolean value. You should all know that now. So again, that's literally, there's the parameter, there's the return type. There's things like, just like there's an uppercase string, there's a lowercase string. All right? We've talked about all that kind of stuff before. We've also talked a little bit about this. Again, notice in Xcode, you can try this. Select Help, Documentation, API Reference. I'm not even sure if that's loaded, but you can find out. All right? And as it says, you'll get stuff like this. This will make your head spin. This is much more extensive than most of the documentation you'll find for most other programming languages. Sometimes it's page after page after page. But again, there's a common setup for it. An overview, adopted protocols, tasks, class methods, instance methods, constants, etc. There's no way that you can look through all this stuff and don't much less think about, oh, I'm just going to memorize that. No. But it's, again, a lot of the stuff here is knowing where to look for something. So notice, then they list out the class methods. So here's some of the methods, some of the documentation for string. All right. So you start looking through this, and most of the time, those are hyperlinked. So if you think, again, I want to do this and I don't know how to do it. Well, if you know it's a string, you want to look up the documentation, start looking through the documentation, look through the class methods and the instance methods to see if there's something similar to what you want to do. All right? Click the hyperlink and start, just start looking through it. What we'll get to later, and we will in a few weeks, but it's also possible in this language, you can take a class that already exists, all right, one of their classes, and you can add your own methods to it. All right, you can extend a class, one of their classes that way. We'll get into that in just a bit. All right, so yeah, there was just a bunch of stuff here for documentation. Before you close this, yeah, let's look at a few more items. Yeah. Says, and just so you know this too, typically if you're working in Xcode someplace, all right, and if you want to know what one of the things on the top of your screen mean, so you got a bunch of options, I don't know what they are. Usually you can right mouse click. Not right mouse. Shift click on them, and you'll get help. All right, there's a lot of built-in help in the software. All right, before we go into arrays here on 17, let's take a break. It's just about 4. All right, let's come back at 10 after, please.